Hi my friends, my name is Justine, I'm the Mermaid Seamstress, and today I'm going to share with you my tips and tricks for designing your very own mermaid tail. Now, before we get into these tips and tricks, I want to thank you all for getting us up to 600 subscribers. I'm so excited by this, and it is a real milestone and an honor to have you all a big fishy family on my channel. I will be doing a giveaway once we hit 750 subscribers. So if you want to get to that sooner, share this channel with all of your mermaid friends and encourage them to subscribe. If you're new here, go ahead and click that red button to subscribe and click the bell notification button because I have some great videos coming up for you. Now, into these tips and tricks. The first one that I have for you is to collect inspiration and just combine it all into one huge big file, Pinterest board, physical inspiration board, whatever is best for you. Collect poems, collect pictures, collect fabric samples. I like to make a playlist even of songs that just inspire me and get me in that mermaid mood, so that when I'm designing tails, I'm just soaked in inspiration and I have so many things to pull from. I have Pinterest boards full of different species of fish that I think look really cool. Other mermaid tails that I've seen people make that look really cool or that use design elements that I might want to play with someday. Just dump it all in the same place and use that as your think space. It really, really helps just get you in that zone of designing a mermaid tail. Tip number 2, sketch out designs. And by designs, I really do mean multiple designs. Just like when you're drafting a paper, if your first draft, your second draft, your third draft, you can pull elements that you like from each of those drafts or each of those designs and combine them into a new thing. Sometimes just like old drafts of things turn into something brand new and can be reused. So you want to sketch out your ideas, whether it be just a basic pattern block or a full-on like color-coded super fancy design. Whatever inspires you, you know, use those reference photos, use that inspiration, and you know, have that as your chance to really figure out what you want to do. I made a tail recently that I will be posting a kind of workshop vlog style video for pretty soon. I made this tail for a friend of mine. I went through probably 2 or 3 different designs before I settled on it, and these are kind of the examples of those designs. I use them to determine both the pattern as well, the patterns that I wanted to use, as well as where each of the different fabrics would go. The third tip I have is follows right along with that, which is sometimes you need to let your patterns sit. I often get into the stage where I've been trying to get a design right, and I get really frustrated with it, and I put it aside for a day, a week, sometimes even a couple months, and all of a sudden I'm looking at it with fresh eyes and I see something that I wanted to do or how to gain a strategy of getting a shape or a texture that I want into my design, and I wouldn't have had that if I had not given it time to sit and kind of simmer in the back of my mind. Tip 4, now that you've got your design all kind of thought about, let's go on to testing your fabrics. It is so important, if you've never worked with that fabric before, to test out your fabric and make sure that it is the right fabric for a mermaid tail. The right fabric for a mermaid tail should be synthetic, usually either a nylon or polyester blended with a spandex. A lot of times fabrics will be labeled for swimwear use, Most mermaid tails are made out of a stretch fabric, but you want to make sure that you test that fabric out just to be sure that it will work. Even something that is labeled swimwear or chlorine resistant might not behave in the same way once it's wet than you would think. So order a swatch of fabric, usually even online stores or like Joann's. If you're going, just ask for a swatch of that fabric and do some tests on it. Soak it in water for a really long time, preferably chlorinated water, so that you see how the chlorine would react to it. Let it dry, you know, give it some various types of exposure tests. You can kind of rub it between your hands and that'll simulate the wearing of it over time. And look at, you know, how does the design hold up? Are the colors bleeding? You really don't want to use a fabric in water if the colors are going to bleed everywhere. Is it losing its sparkle or its foilness? Is the pattern actually flaking off? Those are all things to kind of consider when you're testing your fabric. And it's a really wise thing to do, even if it's just, you know, getting a sample and seeing how it stretches compared to other fabrics. If you're using neoprene and you're used to using spandex, it stretches differently, wet and dry and things like that. So always test your fabric or handle your fabric, I guess, before actually committing to sewing with it. My tip number 5 is to test your stitches. Now, you may come into a project and have in mind, oh, I'm going to use a zigzag stitch on the side seams and a triple stitch on this seam. And then you try it out on the tail and you get these really awkward, like, seams, like threads showing through your seams. So you want to do a small little sampler. Take a scratch piece of fabric, fold it in half, do a couple of lines of stitching, see how that looks both from the side of the seam, test different widths and lengths of your stitches, do a stretch test, all those different things to really get an idea of what stitches you want to use and the dimensions of those stitches, so that once you start sewing, you don't have to fix those mistakes later, because there's nothing worse than seam ripping an entire line of triple stitches down your fabric. Along with this, also, while you're testing your fabric, is test your seam allowance. For some fabrics, a 1/4 inch seam allowance isn't thick enough. You might need an inch of seam allowance, or 1/2 inch, or an 1/8 of an inch. Totally depends on what you want to do, but that is also a good thing to test to make sure the fabric isn't going to come apart or pull out of the stitch when you sew the actual tail. Number 6, we're continuing with the theme of testing before you commit to your final piece, which is testing your pattern. I don't know how many times I've made a tail and it didn't fit. This was before I figured out exactly how I wanted to make my patterns, taking into account the stretch and all of the different components that go into making your patterns. What I would say is there are a couple ways of making your tail pattern work for you. You can do a full-on mock-up, which means that you basically use a cheaper, similarly weighted and stretchable fabric to basically do a practice run of your tail. And I would say most of the time people get the fluke correct, so you might want to just do a pattern of like your waist to your ankles and make sure all the fit is correct, and then make a pattern. So you have your first pattern, you have your mock-up, then you transfer the changes that you had to make with your mock-up to your pattern. Another way of doing this is to just leave yourself a very big seam allowance. Make your first tail, add 2 or 3 inches of seam allowance past your seam allowance to the edge of your tail, so that if you need to let it out a little bit or take it in, you can always trim the seams after you've done the final fitting of a tail. And if you really, really have no idea how to do a pattern and you've made a pattern that you're really not sure about, you can always baste together your pattern or baste together your tail using a basting stitch. Just do it the outline before you even cut your fabric. That way it's really easy to take out that basting stitch. If you don't know what a basting stitch is, usually you do a really long running stitch, which is just the normal in and out, and it holds your fabric together so that you can slip into it, make the changes that you want, slip out of it, cut it out, and then stitch it up properly. And now the seventh and probably the most important tip on this list is don't judge your pattern or your tail or your design against anybody else's, because all that matters is that you are happy with the design and your tail is unique and you made it. So you should be really proud of that, because making a tail is super easy in theory, but it requires all of that imagination to make it yours and to make that mermaid dream come true. I am so proud of all of you fishies. If you want to share with me your tail making journey, feel free to tag me on Instagram or Twitter and show me all of your designs. I would love to see them. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel down below. Leave a comment in the description box below with any tips that you have about designing mermaid tails, and I will see you all in my next video. Bye, fish friends.